Finishes and glues can turn into a complicated mess, especially when space is limited. So today, we're building a storage system that keeps finishes, paints, and glues organized and easy to access. This is an onion project, meaning there are multiple layers to it depending on what you need. The core design is a clam-style cabinet inspired by Steve Ramsey, but we're adding even more functionality, like a front door shadow box system to keep glues and finish tools in order. And when the weather gets cold, you can lift it off the wall and bring it inside to protect everything. Let's get started. In this first section, we're just going to focus on making the clam cabinet. This cabinet can be as big or as small as you'd like it to be. You can add more shelves if you'd like. This is just a simplified build for it. Materials are pretty simple. You should be able to pick up everything at your local hardware store. I went with 1/2-inch plywood to make this a little bit lighter, as I do want to bring this in when my shop gets cold. If that's not a concern for you, you could substitute 3/4-inch plywood for extra durability. All materials and tools used in this project are listed on my website, which you can find in the description. The best part of this project is how simple it is to build. We're just making 2 boxes with a shelf inside and attaching them with hinges. We'll be using butt joints, not the strongest option, but since the whole structure will be attached to the plywood backing, it'll be plenty strong for our needs. My outside walls will attach like this, and then I'll be running screws from the sides in. To give more strength to this, I'm gonna go ahead and glue size the ends of the inside shelves. When we glue size wood, basically what we're doing is we're closing the end grain. Because the end grain is like a bunch of straws, we add glue to it, which allows it to be sucked in. Then we'll add glue later on to the top of that, which will give us a better bond. I'll give this a little bit of time for it to suck in and dry. It shouldn't take more than 30 minutes, and we'll come back to this. I will be using the quad vise to make this. It's really nice because we can add 2 pieces, get them where we want them, and then glue and screw them together. If you haven't yet made the quad vise, I'll show you another method to do this. I will be using 2-inch coarse drywall screws because they're much more forgiving in end grain. Another way to do this is just to use a block. This is, I think, a 4x4 that's been cut down. And what I'll do is I'll put it in my corner, use some clamps, and then I'm able to drill and add screws. Where you put your shelf is really up to you, but I'm going to go 11 inches down, which is going to be right in the center. If you're using my dimensions, you can either go this way or this way. Make sure that your ends are going to be on the same side as the other pieces we just attached. I'm going to go ahead and add my glue, and I'm going to try to slide this in because if I were to push it down, all the glue would just get lost on the top. We'll use a speed square to make sure that we are parallel. And I'm not, so it's a good thing I checked. Now I'm going to flip this over and make sure that I'm parallel. To add the backing, I'll add glue again, and now we can add the plywood. You could use a ruler and mark across here, but I think it's so much easier just to use a chalk line. And there we go. Just make sure that when you do this, that you don't forget about the screws. These are 2 inches, so I went in about 2.5 inches from the edges. You don't want to drill right into them or screw into them, so just be careful and remember that. With both of these now done, we can work on attaching them using a hinge. And this is a piano hinge. You could go with butt hinges with this, but piano hinges are going to work a lot better for you, and they're going to be a lot stronger as far as keeping everything together. The first thing that I'll do is find out where I need to cut this off, and fortunately for me, it looks like my holes are all going to be placed right, so I can just put this on the end here and then add my marks to this side and cut this with either a grinder or a hacksaw. Now with this cut, I'm going to add some double-sided tape. I'm just going to add a couple pieces. I don't want it to move around as I drill it. To attach the hinges, I'm going to be using a self-centering hinge bit. It's going to be the right size for my screws. I'll have these bits in the website on the tools section. All I need to do is drill these out and come back with my screws. One of the problems that I had with Steve Ramsey's design many years ago was that as soon as you open this, it is going to drop down, and there's really not a whole lot you can do about it. There's going to be weight on this side, and it's going to pull down just a little bit. I wasn't worried about having a little bit of weight as it pulled down, but more like when I close this, am I going to have that same kind of draw that's going to year after year be pulling on it, which eventually would cause it to really drop down a lot. So what I came up with way back then is what I call a weight ramp. This is my original one, and as you can see, I've got a pin here, as well as two ramps that when they come together, they're holding the weight of the entire cabinet. What I like about this is that these cabinet doors, no matter what I do, are always going to go back to zero. So I don't have to worry about that weight in time pulling off and damaging one side of my cabinet. Because this is a ramp, and to make sure that my doors are absolutely closed, I drill a hole on this side, and then I've just got a pin. It slides in place and makes sure that everything's lined up. So we're going to create the same thing with our cabinet now. To make this, I measured the thickness of my entire cabinet, and then I took off about 1 inch. So this is about 12 inches. I went down to 11 inches. Now I'm just going to create a diagonal cut right across here. And what's nice about this is that you can use a handsaw to do this. You can use a bandsaw. It really doesn't matter as long as you can make that cut all the way across. You could use a jigsaw. And this doesn't even have to be a 90-degree cut all the way across, meaning that if it's at an angle even a little bit, it really doesn't matter because they'll come back together to form that straight piece. Now you do want this to be a straight cut this way because you want them to be able to line up easily later on. But before we make the cut for this, I'm going to go ahead and drill a hole all the way through from the top down, which will allow these to line up later on. I've got a collarless hitch pin here, and no, you don't need to have a collarless hitch pin, but I like this because it is so smooth. I do want this to fit pretty tight, but I don't want it to be so tight that I'm jamming this in every time, or eventually I'm not going to use it anymore. That's just the way that I work. So I've got my drill guide here, and I'm going to find a size that works really well, and it looks like 17/64 will work fine with mine. And then there's always placement on here. Where do you want to put this? If we put it up here, it's not going to be as strong because we're going to be in this thinner area. So I recommend right about there. That should work fine. I'll go ahead and make a mark on the top. And also, I really don't want to work with sharp points. I don't want to jab myself later on. So I'm going to go ahead and cut each side off. I decided that I'm going to put this right here away from the screws, and I'm going to mark each side. So first I'm going to find the center, which is right about there. And on each piece, I'm going to place my mark. So this side is where I'm going to be drilling holes that will attach to the cabinet. And then I'll be drilling holes on the opposite side for the other screws. I'm drilling these out with an 1/8 inch drill bits, and I will be using, once again, drywall screws to attach these. Now I can find my center, which is right there. And here we go. Our cabinet's finished. Now keep in mind that our sloping side is what we'll attach to the wall later on. So if you wanted to attach this side to the wall, you'd want this flipped over so that this side would be supported. In this layer, we'll add the shadow box front for organization. To check for glue and finish temperatures, we'll also install a thermometer. We'll be using 1x2s and a 1/4 inch sheet of plywood to create a third layer, or in other words, a second door. I've got 4 hinges for this door, a hitch clip, and we'll be using a mix of scrap pieces to build out the shadow box. Oh, and you'll need the cabinet we just made in the first part. Just like the boxes, our pieces are going to come together like this. So again, we need to glue size both of these pieces. We'll give this 20 minutes and we'll come back. I could take this back over to the quad vise, but instead I'm just going to do it on top of the box that we made. So I'm going to take my pieces off, and I don't want this to stick to the top. So I'm just going to add some painter's tape. I'm going to use some clamps this time to lock my pieces in place before drilling my holes and adding my screws. And because these are a little thinner, I'm going to go ahead and countersink each one of them. I'd like to go ahead and glue the top on, so I'm going to go ahead and add my glue. Now that I've got my glue on, I'm just going to push this to the side. I'll add the top, and I'll put the cabinet on to weigh it down. I'll give this a little bit of time to dry, and we'll come back and attach it later on. When we add the hinges to this, we want to make sure that it's going to be the same side that it opens on. Otherwise, we're going to have this giant monstrosity, and I don't know how well that will do with the stress of this later on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure in equal parts on both sides. I don't think it really matters a whole lot, but I'm just going to go 5 inches on both the top and the bottom. If you wanted to, you could add a third one in the middle. I was going to, but I'm not going to now. And the way that this works is I'll just take my hinge and open it like this. And I'll take the hinge on the opposite side and do the same thing. I am going to recess these because I do want the cabinet to be flat against the other side. It's really simple to do this. I've got a trim router. I'll just slide this in with the flat side down. I'll just adjust that so that it's flush and then lock it in place. Like before, we'll use a self-centering hinge bit to drill these out and then add our screws. With half of it installed, we can take our door and add it to the top. I'll line up the edges so that it's all flush. And now I'm just going to take a knife and mark where those hinges are. Take another hinge and I'm just going to place it right on the top. I'll place a piece of stock underneath here to hold it up in place until I get these hinges lined up. With the second door finished, we need to find a way to attach the two pieces together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a hinge with a detachable pin, and you really want to make sure that you buy a detachable one, otherwise you're going to have to grind the end off like I'm doing here. With this in place, I'll use a hitch pin to lock it. With the door done, we come to my favorite part, and that is creating a shadow box system where we don't lose all of the stuff that we used for glues, epoxies, and painting. What's nice about this is that we can create the entire thing out of scraps, and really it'll organize things so that you never lose them in the future. Now, one thing about this is it does take a little bit of creativity to come up with things, but we're going to do a few things together so that you can kind of see where I'm going with this. One thing that we do have going for us that's really good is that when we close this, we will be pressing up against the lid. So if we have things that are a little bit higher, we can slide them in, and then when we close this, it will lock it in place. Anything with a round hole in it, like a squeegee or a tape, is easy to store with just a scrap dowel. Now that these fit and they're the right size, I'll come in here with some hot glue. I want to make sure that this is pushed all the way in. For my glue brushes, I cut off a piece of 1x2. This is 4 inches long, and I'm just going to make each of these fit inside of it by cutting out notches. Because I do want it to catch inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and cut this down to that thickness. With my piece cut, I'm just going to line these up. Now I can mark them with a pencil. With this done and everything fitting, I'll go ahead and take these out. I'm going to draw a line around this. I'm going to add screws right there and right there. I'll use an 1/8 inch drill bit to drill these out. This is going to go right here, so I'm going to add some hot glue just temporarily. Next, I'll add my silicone cupcake molds. Took me a little while to figure out how I wanted to do this, but I'm just going to use a clothespin that's going to be attached to the top, and then these will just go in like that. I'll take this apart. I'll use some number 4 by 1/2 inch screws. For all my chemicals, I'm just gonna come in here and draw a line on the center. This is another 1x2. With this cut out, it's gonna fit on here like this, but first, draw my line so that I can attach this from the other side later on. Now I'll just add a temporary spacer, and this will just go on the top. And straws, I've drilled out 3 holes on this block, and then it'll go right here on the side. I've gone ahead and added another dowel. I've added another clip for my baby bottle nipple. And now I'm gonna add a magnet. And magnets are great for this system because anything with a piece of metal on it, you can stick. So I'm gonna go ahead and attach this. I've got pretty much everything that I use right here. I did leave a little bit of extra space so that I can add something in the future to it. But this is the core things that I use when I do any kind of gluing or epoxying. I'll go ahead and close this up, add my pin, and then open the second cabinet up. I can come in here now and drill out those holes and add my screws to attach the pieces that I added with just hot glue earlier. We had a few things shift around, but that's only because this is not supposed to be on its side. But overall, that looks pretty good. One thing that I'm going to add to this, which is very optional, is I'd like to add a temperature gauge. That way I know what the temperature is inside of the box. I've got this little gauge here. I'll have it on the website. I found that the thickness of this is about 5/32 of an inch. It's just slightly bigger than 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to be using this longer drill bit because I want to drill all the way through to the front of my case. I'm going to start this off and put it right up here. I don't want to get in the way of my tape when I have a thicker roll. I think that I should be fine right here. Now I'm going to open this up again. With my hole right here, I want to drill this out at 1 3/8. That's going to be a little bit bigger than the head of this. I'd like to keep the dust out of this as much as possible, so I'm going to use a toilet paper roll that will fit right over this hole. And now I can just hot glue this in place. In this layer, we're gonna add French cleats to the back, as well as create this base and add this nifty handle. I've got everything here to make this part of the project. This right here alone is going to be the French cleat system. It was all ripped from a single 8-inch board. I set my bevel to 45 degrees or somewhere close to it. Honestly, it doesn't really have to be exactly 45 degrees. And then I split the board in half. And then my second piece over here, I split this in half with a 90-degree cut. And this will be crucial with the cabinet. For the handle, I'm just using 2 blocks of wood and a dowel. You could get a lot more complicated. You could buy a pre-made handle, but this is gonna work just perfectly for us. I'm also gonna add a standalone base to this. What's nice about this is, let's say that you have a lot of work to do and you don't wanna walk all the way across your shop to get glues and finishes. This will allow you to set it right on the tabletop so you're not fighting with the doors to open and close it, as one side will be higher than the other side. I've got my cabinet here, and the first thing that I'll do is just flip it over so that the top is down and the down is up. What I want to do first is add a piece of hardboard. And the reason for this hardboard is so that when we open this up, one side is not going to be dragging across the tabletop. And it should be exactly the width of your door. And I believe that this is. I've got a piece of plywood now that will just go on top of it like this. And as you can see, it's just the width of the original clam cabinet. I've already got my chalk line out, so I'm just gonna quickly put this on here. It's kind of a lazier way of, instead of using a ruler, but that tells me where the end of it is. I'd really prefer not to drill through the bottom, so I'm gonna be using a piece of tape as a depth gauge. With everything in place, I can flip this back over. I can open this up now and it opens up smoothly. I'm not worrying about the bottom shelf pushing against the tabletop. For the handle, I've got two 3-inch blocks, and you're gonna wanna make sure that your end grain is going this way, but I'm gonna come in here and I wanna mark at 2 inches, so right about there. I'm also going to find the center, so I line this up. It should be 1.5 inches right there. Because I want these to be identical, I've got my end grain here. I'm gonna push this one back up inside, place this one over the top, make sure that they're lined up really well. So these aren't so blocky. I'm going to measure over 3/4 of an inch. I'll measure over 1 inch from the bottom, connect these two marks. This is the back side of my cabinet. With my handle done, it's just gonna fit right here on the top. You wanna make sure that you put it on the back side and not on the front side, as you will be pulling and putting a lot of weight on the part of the cabinet where the weight ramp is not gonna be set at. So back side always. Since this is 22 inches, I'm gonna find, right there's 11 inches. And I want to put this forward a little bit because it will help to balance the weight a little bit. I might even bring it up even closer right about here. I will be drilling from the bottom side up again, so I want to mark where these handles are going to be, lift this off, and I can drill through the bottom. While I wait for the hot glue to warm up, let me show you a little trick so that you can add glue inside of this. If you try to add glue right in the inside, you'll end up pushing it out. So a little trick to add glue in the inside is to pull these off. I'll make a cut here on the end so that I don't go any farther. I don't want it to show later on. Now that I've got these little notches on either side, you just add some glue in those spots. So I'll put this in here like that. Put the other one on the other side, and then I'll just turn it so that gravity causes it to drop. You really don't need a lot of glue in this, just a little tiny bit to keep it in place. And I guarantee that you will not be able to pull this off later on. My glue warmed up. I'll come in here and set this exactly where I want it. Now I can open this up and work on the other side. Finally, we can finish things off by adding a French cleat system to the back. I'm going to place it rather high up here, like right about there, and then I'll have the counterbalance down here. I'll add a spacer to the end just so that I know that it's square to the edge. And to make sure that things don't move around, I'm just going to add a little bit of hot glue. I know I use this a lot. On the bottom side, I'll do the same thing. I'll add a little bit of glue on this. And really for this piece, you could just use hot glue across here. This is just being used as a spacer. It's important to note that you want to make sure that your angle is pointed this way. You don't want it the other way, or obviously it's not going to catch. I'll use a single flute countersink bit to drill each of these out. To attach this to the wall, you'll want to make sure that your angle is pointed out. And you'll need to make sure that you put it into actual studs. Unless you have a wood wall like this, you have to put this in studs. Don't rely on putting it in drywall. I wouldn't even use toggle bolts to do this. It really needs to be in the studs, even if it means that you have to make this piece a lot longer. And then it's as easy as sliding it on. Thank you so much for being a part of my shop. I'd love to know what you think of this project and if it's something that you might make yourself. Please throw a comment down below and thank my patrons for continuing to support me, allowing me to do all of this for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember to keep making things.